Welcome to the Dev Talk Show. Yeah, it's March 14th, which I can't believe I'm saying this, but is commonly referred to as Pi Day.
I've got the wrong shirt on.
Oh, did you have a shirt for it?
I have a pie shirt. Yes, it is. I don't know how many numbers it's out to, but it's a big circle with pi out to like it must be thousands of numbers, and then it outlines the shape of the pi symbol.
So I'm going to take a quick quiz. I don't think I can get very far.
I can't.
But I think
it's like 4 numbers.
3.1415, and then I want to say 927, and that might be it.
And I thought it was 3.1458.
Yeah, so I don't have pi to number of digits.
Right.
Search for 3. Was I doing okay? So
you're doing great.
Let me try again.
415
927 3. Just tell me when I'm out. I'm out. Okay.
You're out at the 7 because
okay.
If you stop there, you round up because it's 6.5. So you would have rounded up to the 7. So that may be why.
So 3.1415926.5. No, I really was I wasn't trying to round up. I was trying to think like just how many digits do I know? And I don't really know that many. And I didn't.
You got more than me.
Yeah. I chuckle a lot of times at some of these days, not because I'm not making fun of anybody. They make me laugh like Pi or a couple days ago. And this wasn't top of mind for me, but on March 10th, a lot of people at work were saying, "Oh, it's Mario Day," like Mario, the video game character, because Mar 10 with the one is an I, and I thought, oh, how interesting. And there's all kinds of days like this, like May the 4th is often referred to as Star Wars Day, which I think is I always thought it was kind of weird because I'm like, Star Wars didn't premiere on the 4th, but I think very old school, back to like 1977. When did it premiere? So let's see here. All right, so it looks like we are live on YouTube and live on Twitch. And
cool. Welcome.
Yeah, welcome everybody, and covering a topic that we have done the last few shows, but in a slightly different way. And this is thanks to the commentary we got, frankly.
Yeah.
So the folks who were in the comments last time, thank you for joining us. Thank you for having us pursue this. And I think, what's come out of it is there is a lot to dig into, going beyond just the authentication, getting someone signed in, which you get in the box, so to speak, with ASP.NET Core. You get a solution that will sign someone in to EntraID and other OAuth providers as well. But EntraID, which was solving our work-based scenario for folks of, I'm building an internal app, I want to sign people in that I work with. Oh, we use EntraID, which used to be called Azure Active Directory. If maybe you're coming to that now and saying, what is he talking about? And I want to get profile information for the signed in user. Like, when I use Teams, all that profile information is there, and it's the organizational chart. That's all that rich information. It's all in the Microsoft Graph, right?
Right.
Yeah. So there was a lot that I learned along the way because quite a while ago on this show, we put together a show where we were building Blazor authentication from scratch for the purposes of understanding what comes in the box when you do a file new project and you pick the authentication stuff, the individual accounts. You get support for a login-based system with username and password that will be stored in your local database, accessed through Entity Framework Core, and by default in Visual Studio going to SQL Server. And if I remember correctly, if you go through the CLI, the default is SQLite. I think that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you also have support in the box for external logins, Microsoft, Twitter, Facebook, Google. I may have named them all. I might have missed one. And
Twitter.
Was there another one? Okay, yeah. And so what happens is, if you don't know that support is there or how to activate it, it might seem a little mysterious. There are documentation articles showing you how to do it. We followed those articles. We got the Google support working. And then we said to ourselves, well, what if I wanted the profile picture for this? And for Google, it was quote unquote easy, because it just so happened that their OAuth 2 challenge process returned a user with in that JSON response from the challenge was sitting a URL to the picture. So we made that look easy, right? But in the EntraID world, when you're using a Microsoft account, you don't get that just flat URL to some spot. You then turn around and use the Graph API to go get that photo.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, go ahead.
No, and they've just implemented them in different ways. Google, Google process is here. You're going to probably want this, and Entra says, well, if you want it, you got to ask for it, right? Because that data might be a little more secure.
Yeah. I don't think it was ever. I've never meant to treat it as a criticism, and we talked through why. From an organizational perspective, and here's Microsoft serving with the Graph API. They're serving more than one. They're serving. It's a multi-tenant API, meaning that my EntraID tenant, I can call Graph with a valid access token, my permissions to use it, and now I can get data out about the organization. And so it's just behind an authorization wall. That's all.
Yeah, that's all. No big. Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with it, but
on the other one, that's all.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that the public profile picture for the Google authentication was so easy that it made people scratch their head on, well, what do I do in this other scenario? So,
and I think last time we showed a way to get there.
Right. So if you watch the previous show, you do get an answer, which I'm going to continue to say, it works. There's nothing wrong with it. I think it even had the original commenter who was here joining us in the chat kind of scratching their head like, oh, I don't know. And even I admitted, I said, yeah, look, I took a way out by, I have an update from the executive producer, I guess, of the show. I took a path out by saying, we already have an implementation that gets a lot of what I want. What if we derive off of it and add the implementation we need? Right. And I think there will be scenarios where people want to do it. So let's go ahead and, if it makes sense, let's go ahead and get some code up here. Let me actually, hold on. Before I share, this is going to switch, I think, and then I just need to get this presented. So
there you go.
First of all, the happy part here is that the Dev Talk show is on GitHub, and we have a repository called Blazor Auth from scratch. Blazor Auth from scratch could use some more documentation, which is coming. And there were multiple projects in here. There was a WebAssembly implementation and then a Blazor Server implementation. The Blazor Server implementation now has code to retrieve the Microsoft photo, but it was done differently from last week. So we'll get to that in a little bit. This is the ASP.NET Core repo. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is because in ASP.NET Core, source security authentication, we have the implementations for what I'm going to call the in-the-box external providers, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Twitter, and those might be it right there. So when you
generic OAuth, just
there's a generic There's a generic OAuth. You're right. And in fact, I think it's important to mention that real quick. Let me just say real quick, external login provider, Facebook, because let's connect the dots here. And in Microsoft Learn, in the ASP.NET Core documentation, so we're in ASP.NET Core documentation, which is there's a lot in here. Mm-hmm. But if you drop down to security and identity, under authentication, external authentication providers, here is the Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter. I call this in the box because it's in the ASP.NET Core repo.
Right.
So you click here, Microsoft authentication, and you can, it's thinking for a second, and then you can go through the sample app, and it all works for you. Yeah, so external login setup with ASP.NET Core. Great. You're right, though. You spotted this OAuth one.
Okay.
That's because the way this implementation works is there is a core OAuth implementation here that we talked last time about how there's options, which we've set before. We've set options when we're in the program CS file where we've set, for example, we've set the client ID, the client secret. But if you use the base, you can choose to use this base OAuth implementation. You can, but now you got to fill it all out yourself. You basically have to fill in an authorization endpoint, a token endpoint. And you might remember we didn't do that for Google. And the reason why is because in the downstream implementations, the derived implementations, Google's, so this is the one, if you were to choose Google authentication and follow this, you still have to go get a Google ID, client ID and secret, but you don't have to configure the token access endpoint. You don't have to configure. Why? Why don't you have to configure that stuff? Well, because in this implementation, there is a little file called Google Defaults, and they've already put in, here's the auth endpoint where you challenge. Here's where you get a token. Here is where you get information about the user.
Okay.
So what they've already built into this in the box implementation for external providers, for OAuth based providers, they've already kind of built in the rails for you to not only get an access token, but to go ahead and do the challenge and make a further call after the fact to pick up additional user information. They've already built those guide rails in. And while I think that's great, what happens is, as a developer, and this happened to me, it feels magical and you just wonder where it's coming from.
Right.
So if I go to the Microsoft account defaults, we're going to see this is the multi-tenant authorization endpoint. You could use this for a personal Microsoft account, the kind of account that you might sign into Xbox with or to Outlook.com. So this is already in the box. And that's why I think a lot of people, including myself, struggled, because we have to override this for the single tenant at work situation. We override it with our endpoint that has our tenant ID right here. That's essentially what you're doing. But then look at this. Their user information endpoint is Graph.
And the me endpoint that we were trying to get to when we did this about 2 or 3 shows ago. Yeah.
Yeah, we were calling Graph all along. and it was doing it for us. Yeah.
Right.
So what I had done, and you'll see if you watch the last show, so I won't belabor the point too much, is because the Microsoft account handler is the place to be, create ticket async is the point where you have a claims identity that's going to get filled out with the result of the challenge. And that result of the challenge, that's all happening here, where they've gotten an access token already. So they create an HTTP request with that access token, but they've already gotten it. They've already made that call further up the chain, further up this process. And then if they're successful in calling the user information endpoint here, then they say, okay, well, let's go ahead and parse it And then there's more code here to run what were called claim actions to convert the claims, to convert the JSON that came back into claims to drop into your claims principal. Things like your user ID, your name, stuff like that. That way, I as a developer, I can just throw your name up on the screen. I can say, hey, Rich, welcome. But this particular content does not have the picture. So if you watch last week's show or last time we got together, you'll see that what I did is I came in here, I created a Microsoft, I created my own version of this. I derived off of this because I didn't need to re-implement everything. I only wanted to re-implement create ticket async. And I added an extra call to say, well, now that you've done this, go ahead and call graph with this same access token and get the photo out. Let's convert the photo to base 64, and then we'll add that as a claim before we return the authentication ticket with the principal that has the photo claim in it. And because and that way it's done, it's in the token. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's in the, it's not in the, it's in the claim. There is a claim in the user principal so that now if every time I want to show the photo, I just go grab it. It's base 64. HTML has no problem showing that. Boom, done. But one of our community members was saying, I mean, that works. There's nothing wrong with it, but
sure.
He was kind of saying, like, I don't know why, why are you inheriting off of it? Well, it turns out there's another way we can do this. And it's the secret is right here. Awaiting events, this awaiting events creating ticket. So it turns out something that I've missed in looking at this is this implementation, this OAuth. Let's go back to the OAuth implementation. This is the base implementation, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. It turns out that this implementation, and all of the derived versions, as you can see, they have these little points in the code where they expect that you might want to extend what they're doing. That's what events is all about. The handler calls methods on the events, which gives the application control at certain points where processing is occurring. It's your place to jump in, which proves to be useful from what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel bad that I didn't notice it sooner. So if I drop all the way back out of the OAuth section to core, in this core authentication area, we have, at least I'm pretty sure this is where it is. I might end up being wrong. The events are listed.
Oh, there's the events folder.
Did you see it? Oh, yeah. So here we go. It takes a little while to find them all. But basically, first of all, the very base context of this assumes that you're always going to have an HTTP context, what scheme that you're authenticating against, and that there's going to be options. But you could basically dig through here and find the events.
Yeah, and I was wondering, that's interesting that it expects there to be an HTTP context, because that almost, not knowing if there's something else, but if you're not using ASP.NET Core and you're just using .NET with a console app or something like that, then there's probably a different implementation of all of this. Hence
why there are other libraries.
There you go. Okay.
So this is definitely an ASP.NET Core implementation. And how do I know? Because we're in the ASP.NET Core repo. Like,
exactly.
This implementation is intended for use with ASP.NET Core.
Right.
I got to keep remembering that. Yeah.
So the important thing is having that dependency on the HP context makes sense, because you're always going to be running it as a web traffic context.
Yeah. And they take advantage of that, and it's very useful. But it will not solve every situation, and that's why there's other libraries. And I think, as you know, for Philly.net, I'm trying to work up an end-to-end, as much as possible, ASP.NET Core authentication presentation. And part of that discussion is going to be, why are there multiple ways to do what seem like the same thing? And so as a developer, how do you decide? And I think what I'm digging out here is well, I'm still staying in the ASP.NET Core world, because what I want to do is a little light. I just want one more thing from the user information endpoint. So I don't need to adopt the MSAL, the Microsoft Authentication Library. I don't need to adopt the Azure AD identity. But if I had more to do, like perhaps a trip through the organization, now I'm probably switching my focus.
Yeah.
In this scenario, we are concentrating on, we have a user, we're logging them in, we want information about that user, and I'm trying to remain on the delegated approach, which is the default EntraID approach. When you create an app registration in EntraID and you say you want the web platform, it automatically adds user.read delegated. You don't even have to do it yourself. You can go add more delegated permissions if you like. You can even add what are called app permissions, which means I, as the app, am going to use the client ID, client secret. I'm going to get an access token, but now I have access to the entire org. And being a principle of least privilege kind of person, I say, wait a second, I don't need that much privilege for what I'm trying to do. I just want Rich's photo.
Right.
And Rich is logged in. Why can't I take the delegated access from that and go get his photo and not have even the ability to go get anybody's photo?
Right.
So yeah. Events that we can hop on. So now the question is, how do you do it? How do you write code to basically implement these events so that we can sneak in the middle of this process? Just to reiterate, last time I created, what I essentially did is I created my own handler by deriving off a Microsoft account, and I just re-implemented the one method. Well, let's take a look at what might seem cleaner. So this is on GitHub right now, Blazor Auth from scratch. The repo will be in the description, I suppose. I can probably get it very quickly.
I can get to that if you want.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So we can get it into our chat too. So this is let's just go ahead and run it real quick so we can watch some stuff happen in case one is unfamiliar with our application. I am going to open an in private window. I've got to get through some breakpoints first. I'm going to open an in private window because I want this to be a clean from the start access. And I keep forgetting I have some breakpoints in here. Let me remove that breakpoint. I don't think I really need that one. That way we get to our app very quickly. And what does Blazor Auth from scratch do? It offers 3 types of logins that were built from scratch. Just so to demonstrate, you don't have to do this. You can use the individual accounts project template, and you will implement this the exact same way. But we demonstrate a not production ready sample of creating your own claims principal and using sign-in async to have the simplest possible cookie-based login. And then we also log in with Google. We log in with Microsoft. If I say log in with Microsoft, I am going to get a challenge because I opened a new window, and we're going to use a test user that I have in my own EntraID. So we'll go ahead and enter their username and password, and we'll say we're staying signed in. And what happened here now is the Microsoft handler that we were just looking at in GitHub, we were just looking at the Microsoft account handler, we have now dropped in here.
Okay.
And we're going to run through it. So running through it should be pretty quick. It's going to go get it. We already got an access token that was further earlier. So we have an access token that that can be used. This was returned as part of the challenge. This access token can be used to call Graph and get user information. except that the standard implementation is not going to get out the photo. So as we're crawling along here, we're going to get to this await event stop creating ticket. Let's walk back to program.cs. And this should look familiar to folks who have watched us do this before, where for Microsoft accounts for single tenant, we have overridden the token endpoint with our single tenant endpoint. We've overridden the authorization endpoint, but we also overrode a new piece here on creating ticket. And we have said, when you're creating the ticket, take a moment and call our method too.
Yeah.
And that you can see it's about to call it because we're about to await that event.
Okay.
So what are we going to do in here? Well, what's kind of neat about this method, depends on how you feel about it, is we get past the OAuth creating ticket context. The OAuth creating ticket context, we get past that. It's the same context that this, it's the same context that is going to be created and passed to this built-in framework to create an authentication ticket, which is just a fancy way of saying, here's what it's going to hand over to create your user from. So they hand it to us to say, we have built this context. We've run the claim actions. Is there anything you want to do before we pass it along? Perfect. Just perfect.
Yeah, it's the right spot.
And what is in this context? Well, it turns out there's quite a bit. I think we'll look at it when we're not running through it. But notice that I create an instance of my own class here. And the implementation of this is up for debate. If you're watching this and saying, I would do it differently, fine. But what was important is I have access to a back channel, which is a HTTP client that they have already created. In fact, they created it here. They've already created it. And it already knows the URL. I'm sorry, it doesn't know the URL. It already is set up to make calls for you on your behalf. All you have to do is supply. I mean, this is one way to use it. All you have to do is if you supply a request, which is what we're doing here, we're saying, hey, call that user information endpoint. If we supply a request message and we supply a bearer token, then we're already set up to call whatever we want to call. We don't have to create our own HTTP client. You could if you wanted to. But I figure, well, they've already given me one, so let me just keep using it. The context also contains the tokens, including the access token, which a little bit earlier, I think you saw. So it'll time out by the time this show ends. So I'm going to just keep using it, right? I'm just going to keep using what's in the context instead of reinventing it. Then I have a method called get user photo with this. As you can see, I use this very descriptive variable named something. It must have been late because I didn't change this into a better, I didn't change it into something like Graph API service. I didn't think to do it before I committed it to Git. So let's go ahead and let's dive into get user photo by stepping in. And so this is it. This is all my little Graph API library. It's separate. The idea here is I feel like I could flesh this out and make it this one-stop shop for dealing with Graph as long as you set it up. So someone else could use this same service and they could supply the HTTP client, or I could have it so that if you don't supply an HTTP client, well, then I'll go ahead and create one.
Okay.
Same thing with the access token. Supply me the access token. Don't supply me the access token. Instead, give me the client ID in secret. Well, okay. That would mean that I have to use the app version, not the me version. And again, you can see none of that's implemented here. But what I did is I had get user photo say, okay, just like we saw in the handler, I said, well, let's create a request message to get from the well-known endpoint. Now, why did I not use the default? The context has user information endpoint in there. Well, because I have to tack on photo value anyway. That was reason number one. And reason number two is this library knows it's calling a well-known endpoint. It's calling graph me photo value. So I felt I wasn't getting much value out of rebuilding that URL. You can disagree with me if you feel differently, right? I just didn't feel much value from it other than a developer having to say like, well, what are you doing here?
Right.
But I did see value in reusing the access token that came from the OAuth 2 challenge, because that's a delegated permission now where I can call on your behalf and get information only for you. That's how the me endpoint is usable.
Okay.
And then all I do is just send the call. If it's successful, and only if it's successful, then let's go ahead and read out the answer and let's convert it to a base 64 and return it. If it's not successful and there are good, valid reasons why it might not be successful, then just return null. Blazor will deal with that just fine.
Right.
What are some reasons why you don't get an answer? If that particular user in the EntraID does not have a photo stored, you're going to get a 404, which is valid.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's not found.
Right. So I'm not sure, though, you know that little placeholder that it generates that usually has your initials? I'm wondering if there's a way to get that, because that's what I see teams doing, but I don't know for sure. Not at the moment.
Interesting.
So let's drop through here. It's gonna do it. Now, if it's not null, you can see I wrote this kind of funny. If photo base 64 is not null, then let's add a claim that I am calling URN Microsoft Picture. Let's add a claim with that base 64 version of the photo. And after all of that work, I get out our page in Blazor Auth from scratch, which tells me who I'm logged in as, shows me the picture that may or may not have come out, and shows me all the claims for the user, including the fact that I have now added my own claim, which is the base 64 version of the image, which I find to be useful because, in my opinion, I can just render this in HTML very easily instead of saying, okay, I got the image, it's a file, let me go save the file somewhere. Where am I going to save it? Do I save it in a database? Do I save it in Azure? Do I have to go get it every time? Should I be caching it in the app? Do I store it in memory? I bypassed all of that by just saying, let's make it a claim on the user. And again, I'd love to hear opinions, both yours and opinions in the comments. So that really simplified things from last time. Instead of deriving a Microsoft handler of my own and doing the work, we're taking advantage of the event-based architecture of the ASP.NET Core OAuth handlers, the external login handlers, and we're jumping in and saying, hold on a second, one more thing, get one more thing.
Yeah. And it looks like, it looks similar to what happens with the other accounts, right? If you scroll up a little bit and you see the Google account, right? It's part of the options bit. It's doing a different thing. It's looking at a different part of the pipeline, but they handle those things differently. So it just, it feels like the right spot where that should go.
Yeah. Yeah. I decided to make a separate library, quote unquote, for no other reason than that. I certainly could have just threw all that code right here and it would work fine. But I could see some value in extracting that out, because you might build other applications that do pretty much the same thing. Given the appropriate access token, they can call graph and they can get the user picture out. It could be a console app. Yeah. It could be some kind of background process that retrieves user information. I don't know. So, I chose to do that. I thought it made it a little cleaner, but in the end, this code could have been pulled. It could just all be sitting right there, because HTTP client and access token that I'm using are coming from that context, that ticket creation context anyway. there's a couple nice things about this. There is a feature in the ASP.NET Core OAuth stuff called save tokens. And if you set this to true, then it's going to save in the cookie. It's going to save the access tokens that came back from the challenge. I'm not saying I don't see value in that. Let's say somewhere else in the application, after I finish the authorization process, I need to go call graph again, delegated as you. Well, having that token available is valuable. But my take was, since the token's available during the auth process, let me use it then and not save it further. Let's let it go, you know? Here's another interesting one. This particular event receives a context that has quite a bit of stuff in it. I'm going to go ahead and let IntelliSense show us some other things that are in here. There's the other, for one thing, there's context dot, let's see. You have the HTTP request. You have the refresh token. So if you're doing an implementation, where you might have to go refresh authorization, that's here. You can call run claim actions. You can do all kinds. You can get information about the user. This is that HTTP client that's set up. There's a lot here, and it might be more than you need. And in fact, if you drop into context.options, now you're seeing all kinds of stuff. The authorization endpoint, what's the configured path for if access is denied, what do I do? And then let's see. If I think I have to do one more thing to go to events, and then you can see the different events that you could theoretically override. This isn't the way you would do it. There's a lot here. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it's bad. It's that this is the stuff that the OAuth handling is going to need, because what if I want to redirect to a specific spot on certain failures and certain conditions? Then I can configure that here. I don't have to go with the magic that's built in.
Right.
But it might be overkill. What if, and this goes all the way back to the comment that was made by in our chat that led me this way. What if I don't necessarily need to jump into the ticket creation process, but I still want to add or modify claims? I just want to point out that there is another extensibility point, and it's called iClaims transformation. So this particular extensibility. That's what
was suggested in the comment, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll show why I didn't end up using it. I'm going to set a breakpoint here so that we can watch what happens. But I have basically added a transient service, which means it's going to run. It's going to run every time.
Okay.
And I created my own class, Blazor Auth from scratch claims transformation, and implemented the iClaims transformation interface, added as a service. That's all you have to do. Now, if I go, now that I've added that breakpoint, if I come here and I log out, okay, this is just one of the cases where this happens. But what happens is when the ASP.NET Core, the entire framework, the entire platform is about to create a claims principle, they stop and they give you an opportunity to inspect that claims principle. Now, and then what you do is you return a claims principle. See that? You get a claims principle, you return a claims principle. The purpose of this is for you to come in here and add new claims.
Okay.
And so theoretically, we could have used the Graph API here. It would have worked because one of the claims that you get back is the name identifier. That's the GUID that if you go back to EntraID, you'll see that GUID in your users.
Mm-hmm.
You could, and so I say it all here in the comment. Theoretically, we could use the Graph API here to get information about the user, but we don't have the user's access token because all I have is claims principal. I don't have that context.
Right.
So I can't use delegated permissions here. I can't use them right here. I suppose somebody clever could say, well, maybe I could inject it somehow. But now I feel like, well, wait a second. Now we're making it more complicated again. We could give the app permission to read profiles in the tenant and look up by name identifier because we have a name identifier right here. That would work, but that might be considered more privileged than necessary. And then just for completeness, I say, hey, here's how you add new claims. Create a new claims identity, create the claim, whatever it is, create the claim, whatever it is, and then add the claim using principal.add identity and return that principal.
So
I don't know what kind of extension
goes.
Yeah, it gets added.
Yeah, so you get exactly.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of like I'm not going to theorize right now what kind of situation you might be in to say from the claims principal, I have enough information to enrich it in some way, whether it's API calls or maybe it's just a simple transformation. Maybe you're going to read it out of a database. I don't know. It's async ready because it's a task, returns a task. So you can, and it gets called asynchronously. Except in this case, we didn't actually use any asynchronous methods. So there was no reason to make it an async method. And you just use task from result to say, well, I'm not async, but here you go. Close out the task with this result. This implementation is a no-op, right? It doesn't do anything. But you could insert implementation here. So I feel like what we covered is that there's two extensibility points in the box OAuth handling. There's events, which we took advantage of here to, I think, more cleanly add the user photo. And then there's claims transformation, which I didn't use, but you could use. And that's it. And that is that. Now let me take the example of a user that does not have. Oh, I bet you I've got a breakpoint that I'm sitting on. Let me get rid of that breakpoint so we can zoom through it a little quicker. Let's take the example of a user. I think if I log in again, it's going to save this. So it's going to bring up the same user. So let's open another window, and I have another user in my tenant that does not have a photo. And you might remember the code that says if the photo doesn't come back successfully, don't blow up, because that might be okay.
No. Yep.
Yeah, that might be okay. So let's use that. It's test user. And this one does not have a photo, but has its own password. And it's going to go through all this stuff. And this time we don't have the claim with the base 64 picture information. And so we don't see any picture. It's fine. It handles it fine.
Cool. Yeah.
Blazor is ready for this. If we just take a look at the code on the page here, Blazor handles this pretty well. First of all, there's a couple ways that it handles it. One is that we are looking for that claim. And if we see the claim for the Microsoft picture, then let's show the Microsoft picture. And if we don't see the claim, then don't show it. The other piece here is that, as you can see, we're like going through the claim. So if it doesn't exist, it's not going to be shown. But there's something else too, where in Blazor, I'm pretty sure about this, is that, because I think we've used this, we've taken advantage of this before, is if attributes are null and you set them as an attribute in a HTML tag, it's smart enough to say like, well, I'm not going to blow up. I just won't render that attribute.
Right.
I'm pretty sure we've taken advantage of that before. So in any case,
yes.
Yeah. In any case, that's it. That's the implementation. It's sitting at, it's sitting on our GitHub repo. Certainly, these are definitely very tutorial based, so they're not necessarily ready for prime time. But I would like to build this repo out to be kind of a teaching repo with various samples that hopefully would be clearer to people that are trying to learn what to do,
Yeah, that'd be definitely good to have. And is that what do you want to give a plug for your .NET session?
Yeah, so I think it's not going to be in April. It's still being scheduled. No, because the April date I don't have available. So we'll have to, it's going to happen. But now we're looking at, we'll see if it comes in May or not. But I think there might already be someone scheduled for May. But at Philly.net, what I'm working on here is a presentation on Blazor Auth. It's really about ASP.NET Auth, but in the context of Blazor. And it's going after exposing under the hood the way we have on this show, but trying to condense it into a single presentation instead of like lots of different meetups where we tried things and you and I might have gotten some working and not gotten it working and the slow evolution. But certainly I think this repository is a good start for somebody who's shown up today and watched, which is great. And we appreciate you watching and then saying, hey, I want to go look at this code. So.
Nice. I'm trying to see if we can get a link and give you a bit of a plug, but
I don't know that it's up there yet.
The new one is not.
Yeah.
It still shows the old one. So
that's okay. We'll be back here before. So
yeah, definitely. We've got a few months from the sounds of it. So cool. That was good. That was a lot of digging into and sleuthing, and it's great that there's a couple of options that are there depending on which one you want to go with, which is good. Options are always good.
Yeah. Now, so far we've stayed quote unquote like in the box, which is my term for inside the ASP.NET Core API. But there's other ways to do this. There is the identity platform, which has graph covered in it. And then there's the MSAL, and they solve different problems. Like, for example, here in Learn, we have choose Microsoft Graph Authentication Provider based on the scenario. Well, this is useful because in our case, we are doing a delegated consumption, a web app. Let's see, hold on. Yeah, web app that calls web APIs. You're going to want, and we wanted to have delegated permission to the app. So you would use the authorization code provider. But if you are okay with having tenant-wide access, app access, then just use your client credentials.
Mm-hmm.
This particular documentation that I'm in is telling you what you do is acquire a token using the MSAL and then follow these instructions to either cover all these different scenarios: a single page app, an internal app, perhaps a desktop app, which I think is, maybe it's Windows, maybe it's an integrated Windows user, a mobile app. So they're giving you these different pathways. Now it's different. It's different in that it's a different library.
Mm-hmm.
The code and this code credential, the graph service client, this is all built into a different library. This is the graph and identity libraries. And I think I would like to cover these because I think there are other use cases that aren't quite as simple, where we're getting all the information we need for the user at OAuth time. That's why you would maybe want to stick to what's quote unquote in the box in the OAuth security stuff for ASP.NET Core. But I think it might be useful if we basically said, well, what if I'm building an app and I need to expose more about the organization? Okay, that's a totally different way to do it. And if you don't want to implement all the Graph API calls yourself, now we head over to the Graph library, we create a Graph service client, and that would probably be a better way to go in those scenarios. So I think what I'm trying to make sure I emphasize is that we're solving for a specific scenario, which is at authentication time, add a little bit more info. That is not the same thing as your app needs to go talk to Graph.
True. Yeah, that's very different. Yeah.
So other than that, I guess we're ready to head into the weekend.
That's it. Yeah. No, it was a lot. That was a good bit of going through the choices you made and getting it into more of a solution that's closer to what's in the box, I think, as you said. So
yeah. Like I said, I have some code which I didn't commit, where, you know, I derived off the Microsoft handler. It worked, but I'm really glad that our commenter kind of pushed us to maybe dig a little deeper and find something that the support in the box for extensibility, because it's actually pretty clean and pretty nice. So
nice. Yep. Awesome.
Cool. So it's warmed up a little bit here. I don't know if that means the weekend is warm. I haven't looked, but I think there was supposed to be rain, but now it might be pushed back to Sunday. So we might have a halfway decent weekend.
I think half of it will be decent.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. It's nicer weather. Spring is coming. I will say I'm a little sluggish this morning in that I tried to see what here in North America was supposed to be the blood moon,
right?
And it was cloudy.
So, you know, last night when the moon was rising, I could see that pretty well, and it was pretty full moon last night, right? Because I saw it out a window, but by the time it got up in the sky where you needed it to be, it didn't work for you.
We got to 2 o'clock, and then that was it. But yeah, so much like when I tried to see the solar eclipse, same thing. The place we were in was in cloud. So I have a 0 for 2 shot at seeing eclipses this within the past year, essentially. So
yeah,
but it was worth it. You had to at least get up and see if it was possible. So
right.
But yeah, so I think with that, maybe we're kind of a little past 9 o'clock. We started a little late, so that's kind of fine.
Yep.
Maybe we jump into you wrapping up. You want me to wrap up?
I guess I can set it up here.
Okay.
Yeah, I am all set up here. Okay, sounds good. All right, everybody. Well, hey, thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions or comments and you're watching in the future on YouTube, leave them in the comments below. We do read them. That's how we even get ideas for the show. And definitely want to thank our commenter who led us down this path. It was something that we probably should have looked at a while ago, and it's great. It just brought it all full circle. And I think this will help a lot of people who are building that internal work app, single tenant. So if you have any other questions or any other things you'd like us to discuss, just let us know. And you can also find us on Twitter, the Dev Talk Show, and then, you know, here in the mornings before stand-up. So for Rich, I'm Chris, and hopefully everybody has a great weekend no matter where you are in the world. And we will see you all next time on the Dev Talk Show.